The day started quiet. Dew still clung to the grass as sunlight crept across my front yard. I'd lived on this cul-de-sac for nearly 20 years, long before the shiny new HOA signs appeared and strangers started telling me how to trim my bushes. My wife, Marlene, used to plant daisies under the old oak by the driveway. After she passed, I kept them there for her. Maybe that's why I didn't notice the paper taped to my gate at first. It blended right into the yellow blooms she loved. It was an HOA violation notice. My fence did not comply with community standards. They gave me 7 days to repaint it, or face penalties. I stared at that letter for a long time, wondering when respect had turned into regulation. I built that fence with my own hands, back when I was still wearing the badge. It had seen storms, summers, and the laughter of my kids. And now, it was being judged by people who'd moved in 5 months ago. Later that week, a woman from the HOA, her name was Cheryl, came by. Perfectly ironed blouse, clipboard in hand, voice sharp enough to slice glass. She didn't see me as a neighbor. She saw me as an obstacle to her community perfection. "You've been warned," she said, handing me another notice. "This time, for the unapproved flagpole. We have strict guidelines about." I cut her off with a quiet, "That flag's been there since my son left for deployment." She blinked, unimpressed. Guidelines are guidelines. When she left, I looked up at that old pole. The flag had faded a little, but it still waved proudly. I didn't touch it. I wasn't going to. A few days later, I came home to find 2 police cruisers parked in front of my yard. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, whispering like crows. I walked up slowly, calm but confused. One of the officers, young, maybe mid-20s, stepped forward. "Sir, are you James Carter?" "Yes," I said, steady. "You've been reported for harassment and non-compliance with HOA directives." I almost laughed. Harassment? For standing in my own yard? He didn't answer, just said, "Please step aside. We need to document your property." That's when I noticed Cheryl standing across the street, phone in hand, smiling like she'd just won something. It wasn't about paint or fences anymore, it was personal. The officer asked for ID. I handed him my old wallet. He glanced at the worn leather badge holder inside and smirked. "Fake badge, huh? You can't impersonate an officer, sir. That's a crime." Something inside me went quiet, not angry, not afraid, just quiet. "That's not fake," I said slowly. "That badge saw more nights than you've been alive." But he didn't believe me. He called for backup. And that's when the air shifted, that uneasy calm before a storm. Neighbors gathered. Cheryl crossed her arms. I stood still, hands behind my back, watching the lights reflect off my mailbox. It was strange, I'd taught kids like him once. I knew the stance, the tone, the way he kept his hand near the cuffs. When the second cruiser arrived, its door opened, and out stepped Chief Daniels. The young officer straightened immediately. "Chief, I have a possible impersonator." But Daniels froze mid-step. His eyes landed on me. And in that silent second, the years melted away. He didn't see a suspect. He saw his old instructor. His voice dropped. "Everyone, stand down." For a long moment, the street went silent. Even the flag above my porch stopped moving. The young officer glanced between us, unsure what was happening. Chief Daniels took a slow step forward, his face unreadable. The man I remembered from years ago, nervous, eager, full of questions, now wore the calm weight of command. But his eyes, those hadn't changed. They still carried that same fire of someone who hadn't forgotten where he came from. "James Carter," he said quietly. I nodded. "Sir, I didn't expect to see you here." The young officer frowned. "Chief, you know this guy?" Daniels didn't answer. He just waved his hand for the officers to lower their guard. "Son, that man standing there isn't some impersonator. He's the reason I wear this badge today." The officer's face drained of color. Cheryl, from across the street, took a hesitant step back. The neighbors whispered again, this time, softer, uncertain. Daniels walked up and extended his hand, but I could tell his mind was racing. Memories have a strange way of flooding in when you least expect them. I shook his hand, firm but quiet. "Didn't think I'd be seeing you under flashing lights, Chief." He gave a small smile. "Neither did I, sir. What's going on here?" Before I could answer, Cheryl jumped in. "Chief, this man has been defying our HOA rules for months. He's intimidating our board, ignoring compliance, and—" Daniels turned his head slowly. "Ma'am, this man trained me at the academy 25 years ago. He's not the kind of person who intimidates, he educates." Her lips tightened. "With all due respect, Chief, no one is above community regulations." "That may be true," he said evenly, "but there's a difference between law and control." The young officer looked like he wanted to disappear. I could almost feel his embarrassment, and part of me felt bad for him. I'd been that kid once, trying to prove something, not realizing who was standing in front of me. Daniels gestured toward the fence. "This what it's all about?" I nodded. "Fence. Flag. A flower bed that doesn't match their color chart." He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Same story everywhere. People forget what matters." Cheryl tried to regain ground. "The HOA represents order, Chief. Without it, neighborhoods fall apart." Daniels looked around at the quiet street, the trimmed lawns, the curious faces. "Funny," he said softly. "Looks like this place was built just fine before the HOA showed up." For a second, even I smiled. Then, something in Cheryl's tone changed. She pointed at my gate and said, "Regardless, we're filing a complaint. He obstructed our property check, that's enough for legal action." The chief's jaw tightened. "You file whatever paper you want, ma'am. But you leave enforcement out of it. There's no crime here." Cheryl's voice rose. "You can't just protect him because you know him." Daniels turned fully toward her, his tone calm but cutting. "I'm not protecting him because I know him. I'm protecting him because you're wrong." The wind picked up again, rustling the flag above us. The young officer finally found the courage to speak. "Chief. I didn't mean to." "It's all right, son," I said. "You did your job. You just didn't know who I was. That's not your fault." Daniels looked at me then, really looked. "You still teaching, sir?" I gave a small laugh. "Only life now. Doesn't pay much, but the lessons stick." He nodded, smiling slightly, but I could see something else in his expression, regret. Maybe for how the world had changed. Maybe for realizing how quickly respect could be lost over something as small as paint and pride. Then he said something I didn't expect. "Mr. Carter. I think you and I need to talk." "Not here." Cheryl protested, but Daniels ignored her. He motioned toward his cruiser. "Let's take a drive." And as I stepped inside that car, the same kind I'd once ridden as a rookie, I knew this story wasn't over. The hum of the cruiser filled the silence as we turned out of the cul-de-sac. I hadn't sat in one of these seats in years. The faint smell of coffee, leather, and the radio static brought memories rushing back, nights chasing shadows, mornings writing reports, lessons about honor that I used to drill into recruits. Now, one of those recruits sat behind the wheel, wearing the badge I once carried. Chief Daniels didn't say much at first. His hands rested on the wheel, steady but tense. I could tell his mind was wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke. "Sir. I'm sorry for how that went down. The kid didn't know." "I know," I said. You learn humility faster in the field than in a classroom. He smiled faintly, but there was weight in his eyes. You still live in that house your wife loved? I nodded. Haven't changed a thing. Except the quiet, she used to fill every corner with noise. He glanced at me for a second, then back to the road. You two were the ones who started the neighborhood watch, right? Before the HOA took over. That's right. We just wanted neighbors looking out for each other, not writing each other up. The cruiser rolled down the main road toward the old oak grove, the line that marked where the new HOA development met the older properties. For a moment, I noticed how different the streets looked on either side. The old homes had life, chipped paint, real gardens, stories. The new ones looked cloned, perfect but hollow. Daniels slowed the car near a small construction site at the edge of the HOA district. You know what they're building here? He asked. I shrugged. Heard something about a community center. Didn't pay much mind. He nodded. That's what they're telling everyone. But that's not the full truth. He parked near the lot, killed the engine, and handed me a folder from the console. Inside were maps, legal documents, permits, all stamped and signed by the HOA board. But one detail caught my eye, the property lines. My land was marked, wrongly. According to those papers, a section of my backyard, including the oak tree and part of my fence, was labeled HOA-managed common property. I felt my chest tighten. They changed the boundaries. Yep, Daniels said. And they did it quietly. Started last year. It's the reason they've been targeting you. Those citations weren't about rules. They're about pressure. I looked out the window, back toward the hills where my wife's daisies grew. That ground had my name on it, literally. I had the original deed framed in my study, signed by my father before he passed. They want me to give up the land, I said quietly. And when I don't, they'll make me the villain. Daniels nodded. They've done it before. You're not the first. He paused. That's why I called you here. There's something else you should see. He pulled out a second envelope, thinner, older looking. Inside were two photos, one of Cheryl shaking hands with a developer, the other a newspaper clipping about a pending deal, the HOA selling community space to a private contractor for profit. My voice hardened. So that's what this is about. Money. Daniels nodded. And leverage. You're the only homeowner left whose property blocks their full expansion. That's why you suddenly became their problem. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. I spent decades teaching young cops to see through lies, to look beyond paperwork. Guess I forgot to do that in my own backyard. Daniels gave a sad smile. You haven't changed, sir. Still standing your ground. I looked at the folder again. My name, my fence, my land, all rewritten on their paper. But truth has a way of surviving ink. Chief, I said, turning to him, if they think they can erase history that easy, they picked the wrong man. He grinned slightly. That's what I was hoping you'd say. Outside, the sky was starting to dim, the light slipping behind the trees. But inside that car, something else was rising, a quiet fire that hadn't burned in me for years. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. For the first time in months, I felt that familiar pull in my gut, the one that used to come before a case broke wide open. Only this time, the case was personal. The enemy wasn't hiding in alleyways or warehouses. They were hiding behind manicured lawns and bylaws printed in fine ink. Chief Daniels had left the files with me. I spent hours at my kitchen table, sorting through every paper, every signature, every inconsistency. My hands shook a little, not from fear, but from the rush of purpose I hadn't felt since I hung up my badge. By afternoon, I had everything I needed, the original deed, my father's signed survey map, and the HOA's fraudulent property amendment. Their plan wasn't just illegal, it was arrogant. They'd shifted the boundary lines by mere feet, counting on no one old enough to remember the original grid. But I did. And I had proof. That evening, I walked into the HOA's community hall, the same one they'd fined me for parking too close 2 months ago. Every board member was there, sitting like judges on a row of folding chairs. Cheryl sat at the center, a thin smile plastered on her face. The rest were tapping pens, whispering, pretending not to notice the small-town crowd gathering behind me. "Mr. Carter," Cheryl said smoothly, "this meeting was not scheduled for you." "I know," I replied, setting the folder on the table. "But you might want to see what is scheduled for you." Her smile flickered. I opened the folder and spread the papers one by one, my deed, the survey map, the photos Daniels had shown me, and a printed copy of their developer contract. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I pointed at the line running across the map. "This is the original boundary. Signed, recorded, and notarized. Your amendment shifts it 8 feet east, into private property." "My property." Cheryl leaned forward. "You don't understand how these documents work." "Oh, I do," I interrupted quietly. "I spent 30 years enforcing laws written on paper just like these. And I know forgery when I see it." The room went dead silent. One of the younger board members leaned in, whispering something to Cheryl. She hissed back under her breath, but I caught enough to hear, "He can't prove it publicly." That's when I stepped aside, and the door at the back opened. Chief Daniels walked in, uniform crisp, eyes sharp. He held up a small folder of his own. "Actually," he said, "he can." A murmur swept through the room. Cheryl stood up. "Chief, you can't just." "I can," he said firmly. "As of this morning, your HOA is under investigation for falsifying property records and misusing resident fees. You might want to sit down." Her face went pale. You had no right to interfere." Daniels looked at her calmly. "When someone tampers with legal land deeds, it stops being HOA business and starts being criminal business." The crowd behind me stirred. Some whispered, some smiled. For the first time, I saw cracks in Cheryl's perfect composure. She turned to me, voice trembling but venomous. "You think this makes you a hero? You embarrassed this neighborhood." I looked at her evenly. "No. I protected it, the way I always have." She tried to gather her papers, but Daniels placed a hand on the table. "You're not going anywhere, ma'am. We're not done here." The board members looked terrified. Phones buzzed. Someone from the back started clapping, just once, but it spread, soft at first, then louder, echoing against the walls. I turned to Daniels. "You didn't have to come here yourself." He smiled faintly. "You taught me once, always show up when truth's on the line." As I walked out of that hall, I didn't feel anger or pride. Just quiet peace. The kind that comes when a man stands his ground, and wins. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't finished yet. Because in every fight for respect, there's always one final reckoning. A week passed before the dust began to settle. The news spread fast, not just across our neighborhood, but to every HOA in the county. Retired officer exposes HOA fraud. It was printed in bold across the local paper, though I didn't need to read it. I'd lived it. The board resigned within days. Cheryl was the last to go, dragged out not by force, but by truth. The county records confirmed everything: the altered boundary lines, the secret land deal, the misuse of resident fees. For all her talk about community standards, her legacy ended with an audit and a locked office door. I spent the next few mornings quietly repairing my fence, the same one that had started it all. The wood was old, but sturdy. Every nail I drove in felt like reclaiming something stolen, not just property, but peace. One afternoon, I heard a car pull up behind me. I turned, wiping my hands, and saw Chief Daniels stepping out. He wasn't in uniform this time. Just jeans, a jacket, and that same steady expression he'd had years ago when he first pinned his badge. "Fence looks good," he said. "Yeah," I smiled. "Didn't think I'd be rebuilding it for symbolic reasons." He chuckled. "You always did like your lessons with metaphors." I leaned on the post. "What happened to the kid who tried to arrest me?" Daniels grinned. "Officer Riley. He's embarrassed, but he's learning. I told him to come see you, maybe learn a thing or two about humility." "Humility," I said softly. "That's a lesson the world forgets too often." We stood there a while, just listening to the wind hum through the trees. The flag above my porch flapped lazily, its edges frayed but strong. Daniels looked at it and said, "You know, sir, I remember you teaching us something at the academy. You said, respect is earned in silence, not shouted in power." I never forgot that. I smiled faintly. Guess I forgot to take my own advice for a while. But life's got a funny way of reminding you. He nodded. "You planning to stay here? Some folks think you'll move now that the mess is over." I looked around, the oak tree, the daisies, the sunlight falling across the grass. This was my wife's home. My father's land. My family's roots. No committee, no board, no paper can take that away. Daniels reached into his jacket and pulled something out, a small wooden box. He handed it to me. "The department wanted you to have this. They found your service pin in storage when they redid the archive." I opened it slowly. Inside was my old academy instructor badge, polished, gleaming under the sun. My name engraved on the back, just as it was the day I retired. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Daniels saw it in my face. "You may not wear the badge anymore, sir," he said quietly, "but you never stopped being what it stands for." I swallowed hard, closed the box, and looked at him. "Thank you, son." He smiled. "No, sir. Thank you." When he left, I stayed there a while, watching his car disappear down the hill, listening to the soft creak of the flagpole as the wind picked up again. The neighborhood was calm now, no more whispers, no more warnings taped to gates. Just peace. I looked at the oak tree one last time, the sunlight cutting through its branches the same way it had the morning this all began. And I realized something: it was never about fences or flags. It was about standing tall when someone tries to bend what's right. I picked up the hammer again, drove one last nail into the fence, and whispered to the wind. Lesson learned.